Yeah, one more thing is, I think olden days, when it comes to a language, it's also the expressiveness. How easy it is for you to get things done using the statements, right? The more the statements, more the buts made, right? So the less number of statements is more effective. So nowadays you have more modern languages like Scala and even React. When it comes to JavaScript, I think it's more expressive than the previous versions of other frameworks. So when you are trying to do a boilerplate, you have to think what is the minimum code that you need to do. So for you to do that, you need to understand, as Hasid mentioned, the technology well. So that is one way of actually learning the technology. And so you have the just enough code, and it is more easier to use by the end users. For example, you are developing this boilerplate so that somebody else will use it to kickstart another project. So you have to make sure that they use it. So for them to use it, it has to be more expressive and easy to remember. So that's one way of helping this system.
Ashan, could you comment on the minimal depth of knowledge that is required to start a project? Because if you put up a boilerplate without concentrating much on the ecosystem of the technology, you might be trying to solve the problem in a different or in a harder way than the system supports. Right? So then what happens is people might not use it because it's not the optimal way. So what is the mean? Because the point here is that just having a little bit of knowledge would not give us a good boilerplate which the community would use. What is the minimal amount of knowledge that somebody should gather?
Okay, if we let's take a boilerplate for example. Let's say serverless boilerplate. The knowledge that you need to have is to solve a particular problem. That's quite enough to start with. For example, if you get, let's say you need a plugin to handle the database part. You just have to know the problem, that there's no plugin existing, and also you need to, at least if you start with that, you have to write your own code. So what can you help the others by providing that code in a manner that they can also use? So that's the minimal thing, like it's not technology dependent or anything, like you just find a problem which may probably you know how to solve in a minimal way, then address it and also make it open to everyone, so that not only by making the code open but also giving enough and more documentation so they can really understand how it can solve their problem. So that's what I believe as the minimal thing that we need to be.
You have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Hasid Ayya addressed the one aspect of a nature of a good boilerplate. I think the bottom line is, in order for the community to use it, for the community to start using our boilerplate, it has to solve a specific problem, as that is one of the key characteristic of a good boilerplate, right? It should not just be very generic, because if it is generic, then it's sort of fall into the framework category. So again, I guess this is where the boilerplate differs from a framework, right? Because a boilerplate is targeted to mainly solve a specific problem. That is one of the key things. And for me, I think what a boilerplate is something that I can use to solve major issues with the minimal amount of code that I have, right? So if let's say I'm going to start a new project with Angular or React or something like that, and the boilerplate that I'm going to use should provide me a solution for the issues that the major issues that I have in starting the project, and with the minimal amount of code. So then I can put my own code without using someone else's code. So I think these things we need to consider when we want to get traction from the community, right? So I think that is something I think we need to be concerned about.
What about having boilerplate code with large number of code, right? So it makes it complex. And how do you comment on that? Like, is it like the minimal number of code that we have to maintain in a boilerplate, or is it like large number of custom code? Where is the balance? How do we tackle this?
I think it depends on what is the boilerplate and what is the problem we are trying to solve, right? It should, again, that's where this balance comes, whether it solves the specific problem that we are targeting it to solve, right? So if it solves that, then I guess that is where we stop the boilerplate, right? If we just put in code that is unnecessary there, for instance, you guys can remember what the default MVC project that the .NET environment generates, right? I mean, I don't think any one of us use that. It uses so many unnecessary code which we simply remove and which we don't spend time to even understand, right? So that is something that I think a good example of over-engineering or using too much generated code. So our boilerplate shouldn't be like that. So it should solve a problem with the minimal amount of code, because the reason being there are other tools that can generate code for us. So we should not we should leverage on these technologies rather than us trying to write our own code, because our code might not be good enough for the community, or it might not be good enough for the people who are using them, and their objective might be different. So in order to get traction from the community, we need to balance this.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we summarize the discussion points what we had up to now, we could summarize in such a way that good boilerplate code is minimalistic code which solves a particular problem and which serves a purpose. Right. And so let's move into the next part. Is the benefit of the program where we construct our boilerplate templates or code in GitHub, 99xc GitHub. What are the personal benefits, if I start from Ashan and then move, what are the personal benefits one could have by contributing or by creating?
If you take the 99x open source repository, because there are a couple of repositories in 99x in GitHub, this one is quite open, which means there's no restriction for anyone to see the code and also to contribute. So if you take that, we can't say the code belongs to 99x. It's an open code, and it has its own licenses. Let's say someone starts to contribute to a particular repository, that credit directly goes to the person, and it's his pride. It's not something. It's also a benefit for us because our people is doing that. So that's the benefit we gain. But the real benefit goes to the individuals, because later down the line, the Git repository will be the place where people will measure you. Because today it's LinkedIn, will be CV and so on, but in the future it will be directly the code that you write. So when going in that direction, you can even see today in GitHub, it will show you what's your code frequency and what things have you done. If it's open source, they will also show the code that you have written. So that will reflect yourself. So it's better to start with doing open source as much as possible, because that will definitely change, kind of uplift your brand, personal brand.
Yeah, so we have put up the platform for that. Guys, you have Hazid, you have anything here?
Yes, answer.
Right. Now, the next aspect that we are going to look here is that the technology selection for ISPs. Okay. How we can gain benefit of CA and to improve product engineering practices. So the CA part has been answered, like Chatur, Hazid answered that thing. What aspects or what are the learnings or gainings that we can get from product engineering from doing the boilerplate code?
Yeah. So for you to again, now we are in the product engineering domain, right? So whatever we do also has to have a benefit onto that area. So so when we do a boilerplate, so we have to think of how the ISV projects actually can utilize this in the long term. So when you have something like this, they can actually kickstart a project and start using it in an effective manner. So for example, if you have covered most of the cross-cutting aspects in a project, right? So that can be a good benefit to the customer, so that they can immediately adapting to this new technology. If it's based on React or something else, they can immediately jump into the technology, and maybe you can convince them very easily, so that you don't have to do much here. You have already covered the cross-cutting aspects, so people can focus on the business aspect of it. So for you to do that, you have to understand the ISPs. So you might end up doing some research what the ISPs need here, and what are the trending technologies, and maybe depending on the domain, you might need different frameworks, right? You can't be too much generic about it as well. So yeah, I mean, so that's the main purpose. I mean, for you to do a ISV project, we must understand what their domain and the cross-cutting aspects that we need to cover in that, and accommodate it through the boilerplate, so that will actually help the customer directly. Yeah, and the CA part, obviously, I mean, as Asim mentioned, that we have experience. When you go to a meeting and then when you say you have this and you have done projects, I mean, that's a story itself, right?
Yeah. Anything guys you can comment about injecting good architectural principles into boilerplate code, so that newcomers as well learn these things on the job?
I think that one of the another good objective can be that, because there are different good practices in different technologies. So a boilerplate is a very good place to sort of begin with those practices, right? So if I'm learning a new technology and if I'm using a boilerplate, if I can get encouraged on best practices, that will be added advantage. So if we can build these good practices, good engineering practices into the boilerplate itself, not too extensively but up to a certain extent, I think that will really help to sort of drive the project in a correct path. So that will be another good objective of designing a good boilerplate.
Ajit, do you have anything you did cool tower sometime back?
Yeah, I think that question is in a way repetitive within itself, because someone uses a boilerplate because they need to learn about a good architecture pattern, right? So that's why somebody will actually take our boilerplate. So boilerplate itself is actually a good architecture pattern, right? Otherwise nobody is going to use it. Boilerplate usually demonstrate how the things in this particular domain or the technology, how things should be used in a proper manner, depending on the purpose. Like a boilerplate could be for high-speed computing, right? Then it will actually demonstrate a good practice. How do you do the high-speed computing? Or it could be for scalable architectures, right? So then it should actually show how the scalability is achieved. So the architecture has to be built in. So without architecture knowledge, boilerplate is useless. Yeah. So basically, I think it's more than having good architecture for the boilerplate. The boilerplate is actually a good architecture which will be used by somebody else.
Yeah.
But Hasita, if I just ask you another question tied to that. Now we see a lot of boilerplates. Now
Yeah,
we are talking
you guys
about
can take notes and ask questions, right, in the end.
yeah.
I think not in the end. Anytime
Yeah, anytime you
Oh,
can ask
okay,
a question. I'm just wondering now. There are two things. One thing, we are using boilerplate, and another thing, we are trying to create boilerplates ourselves. So how do we identify a good boilerplate? What are the characteristics? I think some of these things we discussed, but can you just tell? So you said a good architecture, having a good architecture in the boilerplate itself is a good characteristic. Anything else?
It's more of the how suitable a particular boilerplate for your particular need you have. I think that concern was addressed, like be very specific. You don't create boilerplates to do .NET development.
Exactly.
Or to do Java development or cloud development, but you need to be very specific when you usually say a boilerplate to use React with servers, for example. Right? That could be a boilerplate idea. I forgot the question actually.
Good characteristics of a boilerplate, I think.
I think we discussed about that.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, but most of our guys will be interested in would be in engineering or developing a boilerplate.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the question is directed. What are the do's and don'ts? What are good characteristics? Yes.
The code, we actually talked about code size, and again you can actually argue about it. Like if you take Durandal or any type of framework, it has a massive amount of code, but minimal code is actually always good. In a way, what I see is like, if I can take one of the experiences from boilerplate.js, for example, it had less than 3,000 lines of code, and that was sort of the goal from the beginning. So every line we wrote, we actually tested it 10 times. Can we remove this line? So that we can actually keep the boilerplate within 3,000 lines of code. I can see actually that had been a part of the success of boilerplate.js at that time, even today, because people who do not want this massive frameworks, they look for a boilerplate, and if they find boilerplate.js, they find that it's only 3,000 lines of code, they can actually manipulate and use it for themselves. It's quite surprising that even after it's been inactive for about like 5 years, still questions are being asked on Stack Overflow about that, and questions are being answered on the Stack Overflow by somebody else, none from Dynamics. And I recently had a look at it, and I have seen none of the questions asked. There's no question without an answer from community, so somebody has answered it. Many people still use it. I have a feeling it's because of the simplicity. Otherwise, if you take Angular Durandal.js, they actually have a lot of more features than boilerplate.js, what it had.
Small interruption, Hasid. Any of you guys are wondering boilerplate versus a framework? Difference between a boilerplate and a framework. Because Hasid is highlighting, you are comparing Durandal with boilerplate.js. Is it a fair comparison, Hasid?
Is your point that Durandal is a framework and boilerplate.js is a boilerplate?
Yes. Is it?
Usually, when you have a boilerplate code, you tend to work on the code itself and make it your own. Right? If it's a framework, you tend to use it as a framework as much as possible. Right? I don't know. Like there could be so many different definitions for this, right? But this is what I see. In that sense, things are actually the line is very grey, because most of these boilerplates are open source, and most of those boilerplates actually you can extend and you can actually work with it. All of that you fork the thing. Like if you take Durandal, there are thousands of forks. That meaning people actually working on Durandal code, and then Durandal is actually boilerplate in that sense. Maybe Ashan can shed a bit of light on that, boilerplate versus framework. Technically, I think we don't need to care a lot about these definitions and all, as long as it is something useful.
And also, I think at that time you were quite specific about keeping it more open for change. Like you can plug in different modules.
Yeah.
So developers had more freedom to use whatever the MVC framework that they needed to use within the project. So that also kind of was an interesting fact to make it more successful than just going with a very closed, pattern-based framework, like
that plus the openness. Ashan also had to little about that. Plus the documentation. Documentation is very important. I see a lot of people actually still uses boilerplate.js website not boilerplate framework. Statistically, we have 100 times more hits on boilerplate's website than an extension website. Still today. The reason is the knowledge it has. Like it talks about different aspects of architecting a boilerplate, all of that. I think that's very important. If you do something, the documentation is sort of more important probably than the code itself. To be serious, right? It's actually more important sometimes because people come there to learn about it. And when I was developing those two repos, the website was in a repo and the code was in another repo. And actually, I got more pull requests onto the website and probably onto the framework, like the community. Some people from all over the world. Like the current website was actually redeveloped by 3 other people, other than people in Dynamics. Like they revamped the website again and again because of the knowledge. So focus on the knowledge because the documentation and the knowledge is very important. Probably a little bit more important than the code itself.